Welcome back, everyone. Our next session is entitled Safeguarding the Transparency of the Democratic Process in the Digital Age. Our speakers will reflect on how information manipulation damages our elections and what can be done in terms of transparency for online campaigning, best practices in election observations, and new policies to guarantee media plurality and quality in the online information sphere. To moderate the session, I'm pleased to introduce Susan Morgan. Susan is an expert on disinformation and the first executive director of the Global Network Initiative, an NGO tasked with preventing internet censorship by authoritarian governments and protecting internet privacy rights of individuals. Susan is also an advisor to the EU DisinfoLab. Susan, over to you. Susan, I'm just going to unmute you very quickly.
My apologies.
Go ahead.
Please. Not the best start. So welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to moderate this session this afternoon, particularly on a day where the democratic process of one country in particular seems to be dominating the headlines once again. I just wanted to, before I introduce the speakers, just do a quick call out to a particular item of news in the UK this week. So Channel 4 News have been doing some coverage all week on the Trump campaign of 2016, and if anyone is online and hasn't had the chance to see it yet, I think it's available online, and it's a great expose of exactly the topic that we're talking about this afternoon, the reason why it's so important to understand kind of what's happening around micro-targeting and how people are targeted online. So they got hold of the database that the Trump campaign used to conduct micro-targeting in the 2016 campaign, and I would really, really recommend it to everyone. So in the next 75 minutes or so, we're going to cover three key topics. The first one is what's been done so far to safeguard transparency and the democratic process. The second topic that we'll look at is, are we seeing disinformation kind of normalized and industrialized? And then the third topic is what else must be done to preserve the democratic process beyond elections, and where are there some opportunities for collaboration? We've got four great speakers who I will now introduce. Rafael, who is a research coordinator at Democracy Reporting International. He's responsible for projects that are analysing social media on elections, the impact of social media and discourse on elections around the world. His focus is on producing evidence to understand how disinformation, hate speech and online political ads are playing a role in the political process. He's covered these issues in countries as wide-ranging as Tunisia, Myanmar, Ukraine and several EU countries. And he's the co-author of an EU guide and toolkit that's designed to support civil society on monitoring social media during elections. So welcome, Rafael. Our second panelist is Julian, who is head of the project Strengthening the Digital Public Sphere at SNV. So he analyses and evaluates existing approaches to strengthening the digital public sphere. And is working on a project to come up with concrete policy proposals for political and civil society decision makers. So welcome, Julian. Our third panelist is Marie-Helene, who is head of unit for Union Citizenship Rights and Freedom of Movement in DG Justice and Consumers at the European Commission. So she, in that role, is in charge of EU citizen rights, election matters and democracy, and has previously worked extensively in the field of data protection. And our final speaker is Rast'o, who is a media and election expert with over 20 years experience. Since 1998, he's been with Memo98. And for the last 5 years, he's focused extensively on disinformation in the context of elections, as well as the role of social media. He's worked on several guidelines and papers for this topic, including a current one with UNDP and UNESCO, which is titled Elections, the Internet, Social Media, Social Messaging and AI, a guide for election practitioners. So as I mentioned, we have 3 topics. In terms of how the session will run, I'm going to ask each speaker to cover each topic. So we will do topic 1, then topic 2, and then topic 3. And then I'm going to attempt to do just a few sort of summary points at the end of the discussion. There will, of course, be a Q&A session. This will happen at the end, and I will ask your questions for you. What I would ask is that as we're going through the session and thoughts and ideas come into your mind, if you could put your questions in the chat function and make sure that you send the questions to everyone so that we can all see them. And then I will moderate the Q&A session, probably for about 30 minutes towards the end of the session. And I will be picking the questions from the chat function. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first topic. So that topic is what's been done so far on this issue. Do we feel that there's been progress in preserving the democratic process from interference? And I'm going to ask our speakers to talk for 3 minutes each, and we'll take them in the following order, please. So it's Marie-Helene, Rast'o, Rafael, and then Julian. So Marie-Helene, over to you. Thank you.
Do you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you. That's great.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted being here to be invited to a panel on such timely topics. Strengthening our democratic process can only be achieved through a whole of the society approach. I'm sure you have heard it all from the Vice President just now, in a coordinated effort of member states, authorities, civil society, researchers, media, and also citizens themselves. This comprehensive whole of society approach is at the heart of our effort. We have issued in 2018 a package around the European election where there were different substantive measures, happy to reply later on if need be, on transparency and accountability, but also on enhanced cooperation among all actors. So we have asked member states to establish election cooperation network, and we have established such election cooperation network at European level, which triggered a very important cooperation among member states authorities. Since its inception, this network has met already 7 times to exchange best practice and ideas how to improve Europe's electoral integrity and free and fair election. We have closely monitored the European election, summarized the finding in a report on the 2019 election. You heard the Vice President on this, and we identified key lessons learned and potential follow-up measures. We looked at participation in election, which was high, assessed way forward, how to get a transparent electoral process with a truly European dimension, how to address disinformation and election manipulation. Now, just on the next step, you know them, but I would like to repeat them. We will put forward soon a European Democracy Action Plan. This year, the Commission will also publish its next citizenship report, which addresses the exercise of electoral rights and citizenship in this context. One of our key values is informed and resilient citizens, and the fact that the EU, we have this support for democratic values. Rendering our democracy more resilient, securing the integrity of our election, and empowering citizens is key. And we have seen that also in the context of the lessons learned from COVID. For both the citizenship report and the democracy action plan, we consulted largely because you believe it's very important to gather as many voices. And I welcome very much this event because it's also a great opportunity for us to collect views and ideas on these topics. we need to ensure that whatever we do, we respect all fundamental rights, and I insist on the all, the democratic checks and balance with powers and counterpowers. And I have to say that, yes, we have made some progress, but the journey does not end here, and we need to pursue our efforts. Thank you.
Marie-Helene, thank you so much for that. Rast'o, can we move straight over to you?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you also for the invitation. It's really my honor to participate at this conference. So as you mentioned in the introduction, we are researchers. We focus on media in the framework of elections, and this is primarily what we also do when it comes to social media. So we try to use our experience in content analysis, and we try to actually apply it both to traditional and social media as potential vectors of disinformation. So just maybe to illustrate what we do, I thought I would mention our very recent project in Belarus, where we have focused on the coverage of elections. So we focused on television, but we also focused on social media, in particular Facebook, Instagram, VK, and Telegram. And so in terms of our findings, we saw that Lukashenko ran an analog campaign in a digital age. So he used every trick in his book to try and suppress the opposition and survive this election. But we saw that his playbook was clearly outdated. And while he was dominating in traditional state media, he completely ignored a vibrant, organic opposition movement on social media. So on state television, he got 97% of the coverage. They portrayed him as a president who cares about people, who cares more about bread than about elections, that mainly he ignored. But this monopoly on state television was clearly destroyed by social media. And this was not thanks to the fact that opposition would run a professional campaign on social media, but it was driven by citizens who no longer were prepared to accept Lukashenko as alternative reality. And of course, his poor response to COVID-19 was an important catalyst. So what I wanted to say that by doing research, we provide this important information on the role of social media during elections. It is both positive when it comes to being alternative source of information. It is also negative when it comes to being a vector of disinformation. I'll stop it here, and we'll engage more in the next questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rast'o. Rafael, looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for the invitation. I think gatherings like this are very important for us to actually reflect how we advanced as community countering the challenges of disinformation. And I think it follows very well what Jarova mentioned in the last panel here, that this is a societal effort. And I will follow up a bit on what Rast'o said, because we at Democracy Report International do a pretty similar job as Rast'o. We actually collaborated in some projects with Memo98. And I like the question of what has been done so far, because it gives us this perspective about how much we evolved in the last year. And we looked into a lot of elections trying to understand how manipulation happens. And on top of that, we had a pandemic that really gave us a lot of lessons learned about how can we deal with disinformation lines. Even between the elections this year about disinformation harming people's lives, I think we don't have any doubt anymore nowadays. And I think I would like to emphasize some points that were already discussed during this whole week. I think coming in the last panel gives also the responsibility to summarize all the content that we discussed over this past week. And I feel that the greatest achievement that we had was actually that now we talk the same language. I think we understand the problem a bit more. We know exactly what to look at. And I would just bring a few examples about the panel that we looked yesterday when Google and Facebook were outlining the problem. We have these two fronts of how disinformation and election manipulation happen. One is on the behavior side of things. So now we talk about coordinated inauthentic behavior, how networks of false pages push content artificially, and on the content side of things, the idea of what's authoritative content, what's right and what's wrong, and how this is affecting elections. So on the behavioral side of things, I would like to point out that in the past year, we identified many attempts to manipulate and push content, manipulate public opinion during elections. And we will only fight this problem if we act together as civil society and in partnership with policymakers and tech companies, because we need to scrutinize this online environment as much as possible. So I think this one point where I feel we advanced a lot was that now civil society is much more capable of scrutinizing what's happening and maybe pointing out about cases of behavioral interference that happen and actually call on tech companies about why they didn't do so. What type of transparency do we need? So policymakers need to understand from a research perspective, what else do we need in order to do this type of work? And with content I mentioned, I think COVID was a great lesson for us, showing that we need to have more authoritative sources defining how to deal with content on social media. And in that sense, I like to point out something that was already mentioned in this conference, that a key aspect of why disinformation was a bit more effectively, not perfect, but more effectively dealt with during the COVID pandemic was the partnership with the World Health Organization. In election contexts, it's more difficult to draw the line between what's right and what's wrong. And I feel that we are still going to face these challenges, but we have been seeing some advances in that area. And I feel that more partnerships could be done with electoral commissions, for example, or putting more attention to content that comes from authoritative sources, even in electoral contests. So when it comes to electoral results, when it comes to announcing candidates and logistics about the election, this has been also target of disinformation campaigns in the past year. So I think, in short, what I wanted to say is like we evolved a lot in terms of understanding the problem, but we need more and more accountability from all the actors involved. So we need more transparency in the decisions that tech companies make. We need more capacities, and I think Claire Wardle, yesterday about funding for civil society organizations. So we need to actually increase the capacity of all the actors involved to make sure that we have systems of more transparent and more accountable to what's happening on social media. I'm going to also stop here, but I feel at this point we will cover other aspects. But yeah, that's it pretty much from my side.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rafael, and Julian, over to you.
Thank you so much, and also from my side, thanks for hosting this great conference. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion. I want to highlight one of the aspects, Susan, that you mentioned in the beginning, political advertising. I think Marie-Helene mentioned it as well, and highlight how far we've come on that topic, or whether we've come anywhere. But to start off, political advertising, when we talk about disinformation, it's really only a tiny fraction of this disinformation or interference problem. So that, just to acknowledge that and get that out of the way. But I think it's still important to talk about it because it is a growing issue, especially if we consider the need for digital campaigning in light of the pandemic, which popped up again now in the US especially. And it's also important because it's one of the areas where we really lack up-to-date rules for advertisers and for the platforms. So just how far we've come here, or where we've come from, I think the focus on political ads is pretty clear now. Like Rafael mentioned, we speak the same language on that too. I think it's clearly understandable that political ads on social media are a great tool for grassroots campaigns, especially for non-incumbent candidates, but generally for political advertisers to reach niche audiences, to build an audience. But there's also risks. With ads on social media, you can, as a political campaign, you can pretty easily pay the platform essentially to, if you want to demobilize voters, to engage in negative campaigning, to engage with people's basic fears and angers and try to reinforce them. So that's an issue, and another issue with ads is just the sheer volume, right? It's fairly cheap for campaigns to pay for ads online, and if a rich advertiser comes along, they can just flood the news feeds and drown out other voices. And these risks are not just like related to political ads, but also how we deal with them. And this is to the question of where progress has been made. I think when it comes to political ad self-regulation has not been working so well, even though the Commission did take great care to include political advertising, for example, in the code of practice, and we have the action plan coming up, but the self-regulation so far has not been enough. For example, the ad archives that platforms have created, they're a great first step, but they break fairly often and are not that useful for researchers. There's no clear guidelines on what data can be used, and those GDPR rules that we have for that are poorly enforced. Transparency reporting, both for the advertisers and for the platforms, they're outdated in many member states. So, for example, in Germany, we are in desperate need of a reform of campaign finance accountability rules. So I think this is one area where the EU can really play a role in developing mandatory guidelines for the platforms when it comes to transparency reporting, for example, and where they can really help member states as well to guide them to update laws and bring about reform. So this, I think, is an area where really progress is still necessary in the upcoming months and years.
Wonderful, thank you. So that's our very quick tour around the table on the first topic. I'm going to move us straight away into the second topic, which is really, in a way, kind of like a so what? You know, are we seeing disinformation being kind of normalized and industrialized? Is this just something that we're going to be expecting going forward? And how should policymakers, online platforms, and civil society react and respond to it? And this time I will ask Rafael to go first, then Julian, then Marie-Helene, and then Rast'o. Rafael, take us away.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, I feel that in that sense, also what we have been observing in the past years is that on the one hand, we have great efforts trying to prevent disinformation campaigns to be successful, and we saw a multi-stakeholder approach in that sense. But on the other hand, we saw a huge increase in numbers of actors involved in this type of activity. So I'd like to point out for one study from Oxford, actually from last year, that mentioned that around 70 countries were engaged in some sort of activity of online interference in 2019, going up from less than 20 in 2016. So we saw that trend of like, and that's just state actors. I don't know the data from other attempts of manipulation or disinformation related to financial gains, for example, but it is clear that more and more actors are trying to use a strategy that has been proved successful in past elections and past ways of changing public opinion. So I feel that it has become an easy business model to replicate. And we have a few answers to that already, and I see a lot of room for more of those answers. So at the policy side, I see that there is a need to understand where these incentives to make this campaign successful lie on, and the Digital Services Act and the European Democracy Action Plan are very important to tackle all those so shedding more transparency, helping the society play a bigger role in this in the fight against malicious actors. So on that side, I think policymakers have a lot to contribute to. And on the civil society side, I think we saw some good examples as in the past days from the other panels in the EU DisinfoLab conference, like to break down and show cycle of disinformation websites, or also saw
Rafael.
Information.
Rafael, sorry.
That tried to create. Hi.
Sorry. Hi.
Sorry
to interrupt. I'm not sure whether it's my connection or whether it's your connection, but I'm not hearing you at all well. So I'm wondering if you might turn your video off just for a moment, just to see if we can hear you better. I think we hear you a little bit better now.
Oof.
Yeah, we hear you better now.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, the connection is bad, but continue the problems. But I was just finalizing. I was saying that some civil society organization responses have improved successful, and they need to be more at the center of the stage, and they need to be taking as partnerships with tech companies, or even like fostered to have really this, to help build the societal resilience against manipulation of democratic discourse. So I'll also finish here, and hopefully my next intervention, the internet will be better.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sticking with it, Rafael. And Julian, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that question as well. Like, it's on disinformation and like how it's becoming industrialized. I thought it was an interesting framing. But when I thought about it, I was thinking that it's still relatively easy for policymakers, I guess, and maybe citizens and others to really dismiss disinformation as, you know, it's just clickbait, like it doesn't really affect me, that doesn't affect democratic processes. But that dismissive stance, I think it's becoming harder and harder to keep that up. I think there's really been a reckoning that there are threats to democracy if citizens lose the ability to have a common space where they can talk to each other based on a common understanding of reality. And there's a reckoning that the digital news and media spaces that many people use don't have to, but can amplify these issues. But at the same time, I think it's also easy to dismiss tackling disinformation as something that's bad because it could potentially silence people and promote censorship. And then it's also like very valuable for civil society, for policymakers, for decision makers in all areas to recognize, because that is a potential downside to any sort of intervention or regulation. And I think Commissioner Joursch in her intervention before and in the interview was also very adamant about not introducing any sort of censorship mechanism or anything that would even remotely hint at having a censorship mechanism, rightly so. And I think what all of that speaks to is that disinformation, and it's not industrialized, it's maybe becoming more nuanced. It's not normalized, but it's becoming so nuanced that we have to think of it in different ways, right? It's not just foreign interference that we're talking about, it's also domestic spread of disinformation. We're not just talking about elections, but it's a general societal debate that is in danger. It's not just big social media platforms, it's also messengers. It's not just censorship by suppressing information, but also by, creating information noise, kind of. It's not just effects on freedom of expression for those whose posts have been deleted, but also to those people who might not feel that they can be part of a discussion because they're discriminated against. So, like, it's really it's a really difficult balance that you have to strike with all of these questions, and that's why I think policymakers and civil society, academia, media, they need that space to collaborate. Also, that Marie-Helene mentioned earlier, that space for collaboration, so that not one of these groups, not the government alone, or not the platforms alone, get to decide these very nuanced questions.
Great, thank you, Julian, and we'll head straight over to Marie-Helene, please.
Thank you very much. I removed the video because I hope the connection will be better. So
perfect, that's great.
Thank you. So I think that a lot has been said, but just to insist that this fair democratic debate, fair electoral campaign are at the core of our democracies, and that it is key also to ensure free and fair election. I mentioned our report on the 2019 election, where we looked at this different question. As Vice President Jaursch just said, we found that these elections were the most digital election. Now, this was before COVID, but what we see is that there is a clear trend. Is that a large proportion of EU citizens use the internet, online source, and social media gradually more and more, and that gives for political actors many opportunities, and there are also some threats. We see that most citizens use the internet at least once a week, and almost half of them now use it as their main source of information regarding political matters. If TV remains very important, the internet is seen as a steady increase of users. Now, this brings new challenge. We know them all. We've discussed that already a lot during this conference. About figures, you ask a bit about are we seeing? So, and I want to go a bit about figures. And then we see increasing figures on online hate speech. We see also women and minorities being disproportionately subject to some online, I would say, hostility. And this distorts the political debate. We also saw from our figures that almost 70% of Europeans said they came across fake news at least once a week, which is fairly stable among member states. And more than 80% consider this is a problem for democracy. Now, on the Commission side, we have long studied, a new study on the impact of this technology on the electoral process. We have discussed already, and you know a lot on this upcoming Democracy Action Plan. I want to reiterate the importance of transparency in this context, which is a matter of empowering citizens, and we have heard this point already, so to give them the tools to see where this comes from and what is this about and where the money comes from. But it's also a matter of accountability, because it will also to trace back what happened and also to be very transparent in this political debate. One point I wanted to mention also is the important role of national authorities and also the role of national rules and national tradition. We always need to keep in mind that there are some rules in place at national level. Maybe one, and will be at the very end soon, but one message I want to repeat from our European Cooperation Network on Election is that the engagement of the platform with authority has been uneven, and there is room for improvement, including to have a kind of, I would say, equal treatment between all member states, and also the possibility to talk in their own language. This was made clear in our election report. Obviously, development and commercial development should and cannot lead to a distortion of the political debate. This is, as I mentioned, a matter of accountability. This call for transparency, we have seen, comes from citizens, but also from civil society and researchers who need this enhanced transparency. And I would like to repeat what I said, and others also said, the importance of this whole of a society approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Helene. And finally to you, Rast'o, on the second question.
Well, thank you. And I think the previous speakers basically already covered this very well. So maybe let me just try to look at it maybe from a slightly different angle, or to add basically to what was said. I mean, because again, Rafael is very correct that we have seen that this model has been very successfully exploited. There is more disinformation. Clearly, I mean, there are also dangers that Julian mentioned of going too far on the other direction. But I think what are other dangers is actually looking at the overall democratic debate and to see, you know, how it has been moved, and not only because of disinformation, but because of those changes in the traditional media, you know, and then again the amount of information that people could really get nowadays. So with this, I think there is also danger that not only that we will have a banalization of disinformation, but that we see banalization of the truth, which is basically the main enemy of the disinformation. And this is either done by offering several versions of a story, the more confusing the better, or with people like Donald Trump, who is calling reliable sources of information fake news. So, and then, of course, we have the whole issue of deep fakes, which will again move the whole issue of disinformation maybe to another level. So clearly, I would just reiterate that disinformation is a multidimensional problem, and it requires a multi-stakeholder response coming from governments, civil society, academia, the press, the private sector. Citizens around the world refuse actually to tolerate this sort of tactics, and who are ready to push back. And we mentioned to some extent the role of micro-targeting and the need of transparency. And this is where I believe thinking about what responses we need. I think we need some global standards of how to combat these oligopolistic structures which were established by these big tech companies. And there is clearly a need to restrict this political exploitation of personal data and a much greater control over how data is collected and used. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rast'o. I'm going to move us straight away onto our third and final topic. Just to flag, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll be moving to questions in about just under 15 minutes. So this third topic is what else must be done to preserve the integrity of elections and the democratic kind of function beyond the election period itself, and are there potential areas for collaboration? And I'm going to ask Rafael to start, then Julian, then Marie-Helene, and then Rast'o, sorry. Rafael.
Thank you. I hope my internet works well now.
I think we may need you to lose
let me know if it doesn't. I totally agree with what yeah.
Yeah, better. Great, thank you.
Thanks. So I would just follow up exactly on how Rast'o left. I completely agree with him. I think attacking facts and science is an agenda nowadays. It's a strategy. So we cannot talk anymore about integrity of elections without talking about integrity of the discourse as a whole. So I feel that we have been witnessing strategies creating false narratives to discredit experts, discredit journalists. Sorry.
Rafael, I'm sorry, we're really struggling to hear you.
Okay.
So I think I might suggest that we move on to Julian, and then we'll perhaps come back to you just briefly at the end, just to see if your connection's improved. So Julian, over to you.
Okay.
Thanks. But I'm picking right off where Rafael left, because I completely agree that this move from integrity of elections to integrity of democratic debates is very crucial. And from the interview with the commission before, if I understood it correctly, her point was to protect democracy by protecting elections, which obviously is a great start for the action plan. But I also do think we need to move beyond that And so I just want to highlight a couple of things where that relates back to the very first point that I was trying to make about political ads, because political ads are the prime example of how campaigning, how the digital news and information environment is not just relevant for democracy during election times, but rather all year round. Campaigns, political parties, individuals, they can pay for ads on social media year round, and this is not just for elections. And against this backdrop, I do think it's important that we have a mandatory compliance regime that ensures transparency and accountability. And this is a repetition of what other speakers have said, what Marie-Helene said, I think what the commissioner also mentioned in the interview. So I just want to give a couple of concrete examples of what I think that could be. And this applies not only to the platforms, but also to the advertisers. We have to see both sides when it comes to political advertising. So I think one thing would be that transparency reporting, both for advertisers and for the platforms, for example, regarding their ad policies, their targeting criteria, their delivery criteria, this should be mandatory. There should be a requirement to annually, semi-annually report on these ad policies. I think the ad archives, the databases that are already in place, need to be improved upon. They need to be expanded and made mandatory as well. Oversight for these platforms for ensuring compliance with these transparency reporting is crucial. Whether this is to be done at the EU level with existing bodies or new bodies, or at the member state level, I think that will be a crucial question. And on the national level, on the member state level, campaign finance laws in many EU countries probably require some updates as well to reflect the fact that campaigning is not just done via posters on the street and some leaflets that you get in the mail or on the street. So I think overall, you hear me talking a lot about transparency, which I think is crucial. It's necessary, but it might not be sufficient. Transparency reporting and transparency rules that need to be enforced, they need to be checked, and it's kind of the baseline for future measures in this field, which I think are necessary. For example, auditing the reports that I just mentioned, or even later on auditing the recommended systems that are used to play those ads and show those ads. And to close, just very broadly, the digital news and information space that many people in Europe rely on to get informed, to read the news, to connect with people, to form their opinions, it's not just another marketplace that we can just view in economic terms. And it's also not just another regulatory policy space where we can just let the government set the rules. It's a public space that requires public interest scrutiny. And in order to fulfill that, in order to do that, there needs to be established this cooperation that has been mentioned a lot today already among civil society, policymakers, media, researchers, and citizens themselves to allow for this public interest scrutiny of our digital information space.
Great, thank you. Marie-Helene, do you have something to add?
Yes, thank you very much. Obviously, the question goes beyond the election period. It's a question of fair democratic debate, and a fair democratic debate, this is the basis of our democracies. Now, those are issues we are looking at in the framework of the preparation of the Democracy Action Plan and also the Citizenship Report and other initiatives. And currently, we are looking at all the contributions we've received for these instruments, and there were many interesting input on this question. I mentioned the work being conducted in the framework of the European Election Network, and there were some interaction between authorities and other stakeholders in this context. And I believe it is very important to keep this comprehensive and balanced approach. But there is one point I would like to mention, which is prominent in our post-election report, but also in other policy document of the Commission, which is inclusiveness. No one should be left behind in our European democracy. When we look at this topic, we need to look also at it from the perspective of inclusiveness, to make sure that all can take part fairly in this democratic debate. We need also to look at this modernized political participation, to make sure that the tools provide the necessary means for European citizens to take part in the political process. And last but not least, when we see the challenge that we face, we need to address them in a European way, with democracy as one of our basic values. We need to respect all of fundamental rights and principles as we have in our treaties. We need to keep this balanced approach, respecting the democratic checks and balance, the fundamental rights and freedom of expression, but also others, and involving all the concerned entities. We have discussed about media, civil society organizations play an important role, private entities, and also empowered citizens themselves. And as it is the last question, I would like also to thank you for the great opportunity, because I found this section extremely interesting.
Great, thank you, Marie-Helene. So, Rast'o, I'm going to ask you if you have any final comments, and then I think we've got Rafael back via the phone rather than the internet, so I will come back to him and just give him 1 more minute at the end. So, thanks, Rast'o.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Again, I think both Julian and Marie-Helene already made the important points. So I would just reiterate, indeed, this is, even though elections are the cornerstones of our democracy, but clearly we are talking about protecting our public space, as Julian said. And there are obviously many actors who try to sort of in a way undermine this public space and come up with some destruction, and this is where we need to really protect this space. Now, I fully agree with Commissioner Jourova, as she mentioned during the interview, that when it comes to disinformation, we should not really apply the type of methods to sort of consider it as if it were illegal content. I mean, this is something that I would also go against. I mean, this is we really need other ways, and here I would really just sort of reiterate the need to strengthen digital literacy skills and transparency in political online advertising. You know, supporting fact-checking initiatives. I wanted to highlight the need of good quality journalism. I think. Particularly, you know, when it comes to public service media, I mean, this is one area which could really be very helpful in sort of tackling disinformation, because we don't want to go the same way as these who are spreading the disinformation. We really want to have a different approach, which is not to have less information, but rather, you know, have good quality information. So in all this, I think we already mentioned the need for cooperation, you know, sharing best practices. I think this is absolutely crucial. We see that there are really different levels of experience among even EU member states, but also outside of the EU. So that's why the role of EU in this process is absolutely crucial when it comes to you know, the DSA, or when it comes to, you know, the other initiatives, particularly the Democracy Action Plan. So I will stop it here. Also, thank you so much for the invitation, and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. And Rafael, do you want to just have 1 more minute just to wrap up what you were discussing?
No, definitely. I hope you hear me well. You can hear me now?
A little better, yes.
I'm sorry for that. It happened. I would just wanted to wrap up this this question saying that what I see the main challenge in the coming years to come is for us to come back to a common factual background. We've been losing this factual background from conspiracy theories, disinformation campaigns. In the past months, we've been seeing QAnon groups getting much more strong, healthcare misinformation getting stronger, climate misinformation getting stronger. So we are losing some people from the democratic debate. And I think in order to preserve integrity of elections, we need to bring people back to this common understanding of reality. That's pretty much what I wanted to add from the past interventions. Thank you very much, and sorry again for the connection to control that. But really important panel, really important discussions, and I hope to continue as part of this community moving forward with the understanding of the problem.
Great, thank you, Rafael. I feel like no online conference would be complete without a problem with connection somewhere. I'm just sorry that it was you who was having to provide that today. So I'm going to try in a minute or so to summarize the richness of the conversation that we've had over the last hour or so. And I think there's probably four things that I would highlight, and then I'm going to go into the questions, of which I already have quite a few written down. So I guess my first reflection on the discussion is just the importance of moving sort of beyond the election framing, and that it's actually about the kind of integrity of the democratic discourse as a whole. I absolutely take the point that, you know, attacking the truth is definitely an agenda that is being pushed by a lot of people. And so I think it was really good to hear the emphasis on the fact that this is kind of a multidimensional problem and that we need a multidimensional response. And would also echo what Marie-Helene said about, fair democratic debates really being the kind of basis for our democracies. I think the second reflection is really on just how the issue is changing. I think it's not just about foreign interference, but there's also kind of domestic interference, and kind of domestic pushing of disinformation is becoming a much more important issue. It's not just about the social media platforms, but also about messenger applications and private groups and things where actually it's much more difficult to study and understand and get insights into what's going on. And just talk about the kind of proliferation of actors who are looking to undermine online discourse. The third point that I'd take away, I think, is that political ads are important, but a kind of tiny fraction of the problem. But I really welcomed Julian's kind of points around the limitations on self-regulation that we've seen, and that this is kind of insufficient so far, that we've got challenges with access to data, we've got challenges with ad libraries, and that we need transparency and accountability, not just from the platforms, but also from the advertisers. I think that's something that sometimes gets slightly overlooked. And then I was going to end as a segue really into the questions on the case study that Rast'o talked about in relation to the first topic with Belarus, partly because it's so topical, but I thought it was so interesting what you talked about in terms of the fact that Lukashenko ran an analog campaign in the digital age. And that statistic of 97% state TV coverage is quite astonishing. But I think, does illustrate how the online space can still be a powerful place. So those were my takeaways from what has been a fascinating conversation. So thank you very much. I've got 4 questions already. So I'm going to open up the first question to our panelists, and this is, so why isn't more attention and research focused on disinformation on radio and TV? And not only about the kind of the old media, so to speak, but also the role that they play in amplifying fringe players on social media. So a few people were interested in this. So Rast'o, perhaps you would like to start with this, and then I'll open it up to other panelists.
Sure. Thank you so much, and thanks a lot for this question. I think it's very important because it would be, in my view, slightly incomplete. I mean, if we only look at social media without actually looking at the full background, and this is exactly why we are trying to do actually both. I mean, we are trying to look at both traditional and social media, and we try to compare the type of narratives, the type of topics, you know, and also of course, there is a big interaction between these two types of media. You know, they influence each other. So I think it's important to understand this dynamism and how it sort of works. And to specifically respond to that, I would basically say that it is actually that we are exploring disinformation on traditional media as well. I mean, this is particularly demonstrated by state media propaganda. I mean, this is again, like there are basically narratives which are developed more and more internally or locally within the states, and basically applied by state actors such as Lukashenko. I mean, who was basically manipulating the public opinion, you know, prior to elections, during elections, and basically saying that he is the only viable alternative to run the country. Whereas, you know, there was basically very limited space for the opposition to be able to be visible. So disinformation, as it was said many times, I mean, this is nothing new, and it has been really explored by many researchers. I mean, on traditional media. What is new is actually the way how it is amplified, particularly thanks to digital media. So whatever was more like a localized problem for maybe one election, when this type of state propaganda was used, has now become a global problem, because within a few seconds you can actually spread disinformation without any boundaries to millions of people. So I would say that you know, I think there is actually research into traditional media disinformation.
Great, thank you. Rafael, from the work that you do you have a perspective on the role of traditional media and perhaps its connection to social media?
Yeah, I can only echo what Rast'o said about state media also serving as a channel from disinformation in some countries. But one point that I wanted to emphasize is that now we have a lot of state actors actually in democracies, like one example being the United States or Brazil, that disinform and actually are echoed by media. So media normally reports on what these political actors are saying. And in the past years, we had to learn how to deal with this new reality, which is authorities lying more than they used to do before, and how to actually report without amplifying, how to fact check without amplifying something. So there is a lot of lessons from the side of media also to be learned in this whole process. And not only the fact that disinformation is coming from these sources, but other aspects that are as harmful to democracy as polarization and very polarized discourse, very polarized topics are also something that media and other types of like journalists have to deal with. So whether to report some outrageous comments that might trigger some disinformation campaigns. So like if you signal to white supremacists and then a full machine of disinformation starts coming around that. So it's much more complex than only learning how to report, but actually learning how to play a constructive role in this new information environment where things move faster than our capacity to understand and react to them properly. So it's quite a challenging, and I think it cannot go separate from the role of social media.
Great, thank you. And Marie-Helene and Julian, do you have any thoughts or comments on this interplay between traditional media and new media?
May I? It's Marie-Helene here.
Please, yes, do.
Thank you. So maybe one point is that, as I mentioned earlier, we need to keep in mind that there is already a rich national democratic culture among our member states. And then when we speak about radio and TV, there are already in many member states rules in place regarding this type of media. No, one of the messages of our election package was to make sure somehow that the principle contained in these national rules which apply to what I would call offline media would also find their way, or the principle of these rules, in the online sector. And you will remember what Vice President Jourova said today, the fact that we need to intervene in this online sector. This is why we looked at this from the digital age perspective, especially. This being said, obviously, and this is a very important point, we keep an holistic approach, and we need to keep an holistic approach. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Julian, any final thoughts before we move on to our next question?
Just seconding everything the other speakers said, and adding just one thought regarding the polarization. I think that is also another crucial aspect to recognize, that polarization in society, well, it's not bad in and of itself, but the hyperpolarization that we see today, that's nothing that has root causes just in social media. So I want to highlight to you what everyone else said, especially you can see it in the US, but you can also see it in the TV landscape in some European countries where polarization really predates social media, but it's been amplified by it. So I think it's really valuable what everyone said, that they need to be thought of together.
Great, thank you. Another question that we've had, which I think is a good segue, just and reflecting on something that Rafael said. So someone has asked, how can we hold decision makers and politicians accountable for the distribution of dis and misinformation?
So for disinformation, yes, they themselves spread, or yes, in general?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to take that first, Julian?
Well, I think it's a fair question, because especially when we talk about what we talked about earlier, that it's not just foreign interference that we need to keep in mind with disinformation, but domestic spreaders. We can take that even a step further and say, well, when we talk about the prime domestic spreaders of disinformation, what do we do about them when they are actually holding political office? And I mean, this is very clearly the case in the US government, especially with the presidency at the moment, but you can use that playbook in other contexts as well. I'm not sure there's a clear answer. Maybe one step would be to make sure that those people who have a large following online, they have to have some sort of additional scrutiny to their posts. So this is this principle of freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. But the counter argument obviously is, well, if it's a government official, you can't limit their reach, or what if they have to spread important messages to their Twitter following? So it's kind of this nuance, like this difficult balance that you have to strike here. But it also goes back to what Rast'o said earlier. I think ultimately it's not just about social media, it's not about disinformation, it's about public discourse. It's about media literacy, it's about training citizens to understand what they can expect of their elected officials, how they can hold them accountable. But this obviously is like a long-term, very complex, very difficult task that's not just like some snap tech solution where like, oh yeah, let's implement this and then they'll be held accountable.
Great, thank you for giving the kind of skeptical view of tech solutionism. Marie-Helene, any thoughts that you have on this question?
Thank you very much. Just to echo what has been said about the citizens, they need the tools to become these empowered, resilient citizens. and that's work we are all contributing to. And there is a very simple way in our democracy to hold decision makers accountable, which is via open, free, and fair election. So we need to make sure. It's like a catch-22, but we should not forget that. This goes really together. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Rafael.
Yeah, I think I have two considerations for this point. The first one is something we observed with how tech companies related to corona disinformation coming from politicians. So for the first time, they took down or labeled posts from Bolsonaro from Donald Trump because they actually were harming people's possible health. So I think on the one hand, there must be an agreement about what to do with information that comes from authorities that is not true. So like they should really have a coordinated response to this type of challenges and not leave to each company the consideration of what should be done. This is on the side of social media. But coming from a side of a societal problem, I feel that this has become more and more the rule in recent elections. Populism, polarization has becoming much more the rule of the game. And I would say that as a more societal response to that, I only see political parties and political candidates just coming together and really establishing this common understanding of reality, even though they disagree with how things should move forward. They should agree on some factual and scientific evidence. A lot of polarized parties and candidates are going more and more to the side of conspiracy theories and polarization, and we need to come back to this reasonable political debate that that's the only way I see from a societal perspective.
Great, thank you. And Rast'o.
Yeah, I completely agree with Rafael and with the previous speakers. It's very fashionable to always try to come up with some new solutions, but here I think we just have to go back to the old good tradition of when we had very good journalists who really were doing this job for us. I mean, who were basically calling a lie and explaining the context. And if someone has a tendency to undermine that COVID-19 is a dangerous virus, and then eventually catches it, it's just an irony on its own. But basically, yes, I think we have to go back to, as Marie-Helene said, basically to the core values. This is where we need to protect this public space, as we spoke, and I think we have to come up with a way how to better monetize good quality journalism in digital age, because there are good journalists out there. We need them more than ever. It's not true that now when we have too much information that we do not need good journalists. We still need them, and this is one of the reasons why we need them, because again, we need this sort of excellent fact-checking. We need to understand why it's so important, for people to understand, to increase digital literacy, as I have mentioned before.
So we have under 10 minutes left and 3 questions. So I'm going to try to cover all three questions. I'm going to start off with one on a slightly different topic, which is how can we escalate efforts to counter disinformation? So do we have a framework to work from? And what can civil society do? So Julian, can I ask you to take that?
Can you repeat the framework part of the question?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So how do we escalate efforts to counter disinformation? Okay. And do we have a framework to work from? And kind of what's the role of civil society?
I think civil society has a number of roles to play, and you can kind of see that reflected in the panel here today, or like throughout the conference. We have folks here on the panel that are actively engaging in researching disinformation. We are supporting journalism. Myself, looking more at the policy analysis side, and this is kind of reflecting what Rafael said earlier. This collaborative space is necessary. I think Marie-Helene also mentioned it to include civil society discussion. But how to scale that up or how to escalate it? I mean, it is a money question. I think this was also brought up in the interview with the commissioner, which is not an easy topic to A, demand money, and B, demand it then from government too, because that comes with maybe a whole range of other issues attached to it. But I think it's also this type of capacity building that I think Rafael mentioned in his earliest intervention today, that we as civil society, we as citizens, we can get better at detecting this, and maybe there's programs in education, in news literacy that Rast'o was mentioning, for all ages that could be potentially scaled on a national, even European level. But as I was listening to the previous answer, I think this ties into here as well. It's not just one thing that can be used to counter disinformation. It has to be this comprehensive thing. And I think all of us have like different emphases, but you need to throw them all in a bucket, and then that's what you need to scale up. So from journalism to literacy to civic education to voting to regulation, like all of this needs to be combined.
Thank you, Julian. Rast'o.
Completely agree, and basically not to repeat the same thing, but just I think everyone should start from himself or herself, and for me it is actually civil activism, because this is the whole issue with disinformation is actually undermining the concept of activism, undermining the concept of democracy, and I think we have come to realization that this is not a given. And I think everyone from us, we have to simply contribute to this, and so we should all basically become civil activists and actually really sort of be engaged in this very actively. And for some, it means to better understand how disinformation can be spread. But for some who are basically on the front line, it actually means, to really be more visible for the others. I mean, to follow those examples. So I think civil activism would be, for me, the most important thing to sort of escalate these efforts.
Great, thank you. And Rafael.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues, and I guess on the side of the framework, what I would emphasize is how important I see the Digital Services Act and the European Democracy Plan as the base for this type of framework to be provided. Because for civil society to be active and strong, it's not only funding, but it's also data access to do this type of research that sometimes is not available. It's also having their voices heard, because at the moment I see that a lot of the advocacy comes from the efforts of the organizations themselves. So there is not a fora that these exchanges can be done apart from the ones that we create ourselves. So I feel that a lot is happening, but we need to organize these different initiatives and make the best impact out of them. And also have more and more, I guess, interactions like that, because even with COVID, I think that coming together is important for us to, as I mentioned in the beginning, first have a common understanding of the problem, but not only that, really give actionable steps to solve each aspect of this problem. So I just wanted to mention the importance that I see regulation in that sense.
Great, thank you, Rafael. And Marie-Helene, I give the floor to you for the last comments.
Thank you very much. Just to restate the importance of this comprehensive whole of society approach, which is key to ensure the respect of checks and balance in our democracy. In this context, the role of civil society is extremely important, and there is also a role for all actors, as we discussed previously, for competent authorities, for empowered citizens themselves, for private sector, just to mention some of them. I think this is a very important part of these checks and balance to have space for civil society to play its role. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. And so a big thank you to our panelists for covering such a huge range of topics in a relatively short space of time. Very appreciative for your comments, your insights and your thoughts. And with that, I will hand back to Thomas. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I don't know if everyone can see and hear me. It should be good. I'm now going to pass straight over the floor to our Executive Director, Alexandre Alaphilippe, who will conclude the conference with a couple of remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. What a week it has been. So, first, thank you. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for your questions. We had, in average, more than 200 participants every day of the conference. So thank you for this. Thank you for spending the time with us. It's been a challenge to move from a physical to a virtual conference. You were here with us, and that was great. I would like to remind you first that if you could not attend all of the sessions, or you would like to visualize, to view again, to watch again some of the sessions, most of them will be available on our YouTube account next week. Please follow up. The links will be posted on our Twitter account and on our next newsletter. We also encourage you to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Next step also on Monday, you will receive a short survey, not so short, but a survey about this event. Please, please, please be honest in your response. Help us to improve. We're all trying to find a way in this new virtual world. So please help us to where we were useful, what could be better, what could be improved, what you liked, what you didn't like. That's very important for us. Now, one of the main feelings we got from all this week, from the topics we discussed, especially in this very challenging year, was the need to act as a community. We need to have more spaces to discuss, more spaces to cooperate, and to work together. To work together geographically, but also horizontally, as many types of actors and skills are needed to be efficient. And only a decentralized network of actors will have an impact, from exposing foreign interferences to put a break to lucrative disinformation, to political disinformation in campaign, and to educate society through media and digital literacy. So we need to organize ourselves, but we also need to make sure we will be able to continue the work we are doing. Yesterday, the vibrant call from Claire Waddle for a multi-year sustainable and safeguarding independence funding system is crucial. We obviously support this call, and please contact us if you want to help us to bring this as a priority in the EU agenda. This is currently crucial to build capacity to be able to play a role in fighting disinformation. Success of our work can only be collective. Speaking about collective and teams, I would like to invite on our virtual stage, and I will do this as much as we speak, the whole DisinfoLab team. So I would like to thank, let me find them at the same time, and please, colleagues, can you put your video on? So I will ask Gary, Roman, Anna, Claire, Antoine, Gary, Roman, Anna, is so many people now. Claire, Antoine, to join me on stage. Yes, thank you. Please show your faces, guys. We're so happy that you did this fantastic event this week, Antoine. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank Clara Hanno and Lauren Ham, our colleagues that have helped drafting this program and this event for about a year now, and are now gone for new adventures. So I would like to thank them, even if they're not with us anymore today. And please join me all together in a round of applause for the commitment of this team, the professionalism of this team, as well as the good spirit and humor. Thank you, guys. So, guys, we're looking forward to seeing you very soon. Through calls, maybe we'll meet in Brussels, maybe we'll meet elsewhere, we'll see. Don't forget, we'll have a webinar series in the next weeks to follow up on some of the discussion we had, and as well as regular conversations. Now, to close the EU DisinfoLab 2020 virtual conference, I'm leaving the floor to my friend and colleague, Gary Machado, with a few words. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. There's a message that we read not so long ago with the colleagues at the EU DisinfoLab. It's a message that was written in Grafica's report on exposing secondary infection, and we wanted to share it with you to conclude this conference. I'm just going to read it now. It's called Dedication. The authors dedicate this report to the growing community of online investigators of information operations on social media around the world. Whether working as journalists, researchers, analysts, and site integrity or trust and safety teams at the tech platforms, as academics or as private citizens, their dedication, creativity, enthusiasm, courage, and humor are a constant inspiration to dig deeper and document rigorously. Thank you for going down the rabbit hole with us, knowing that your reading and riding along makes the pursuit worthwhile. This being said, we hereby declare the EU DisinfoLab's 2020 conference closed. Thank you very much to all of you on behalf of the entire EU DisinfoLab team, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon. Goodbye.